Wow, what a year for uranium. 2021 was the year when all the uranium bulls were proved absolutely correct. Uranium skyrocketed. The stocks did extremely well. Everyone who was in very early profited massively. Obviously, nothing goes up in a straight line, which is why markets like to go up and then correct 50% and scare everyone out who bought in at the high. That's just how it works. But what we should do is go back to what those people that correctly predicted that initial spike and see what they are saying. I just had Justin Hune on the show. He thinks it's a 2 to 4 year bull market ahead in uranium because that is how long it's going to take for the supply demand fundamentals to finally even out. We have massively bullish demand fundamentals, just as bullish as uranium has ever been in its entire history, even before the massive 2007 pump. And so the supply is going to have to catch up. It just is. So we had a rough week in uranium miners last week. North Shore Global Uranium Mining ETF down 10%. For the month, down 9%. And for the year, up 67%. So long-term investors did very well. The chart chasers and the short-term oriented investors suffered if they were buying at the top. But we have to look at 2022, guys, because obviously that's all that matters to us, right? What's going to come? So these are the outcomes, the potential outcomes for uranium investors in 2022. The first potential outcome is, and this to me is the most likely, the Federal Reserve continues to threaten raising rates. Ask anyone, most people outside of kind of the alternative financial media think that the Federal Reserve is actually going to be raising rates. They take them at their face value, which is why we're seeing major depression in commodity prices and inflation-oriented assets, and even kind of a flat stock market. And so what has happened every single time since 2008 when the Federal Reserve has threatened to raise interest rates? The market has tanked and they've come in and saved it every single time, because what happened in 2008 is they did not allow the cheap money addicted economy to go through withdrawal when they should have. They just pumped it more and more and more and more. And now it's an addict and it's addicted and it can't be let down or it'll die pretty much. It'll go through withdrawal and die, which is why since 2008, the Federal Reserve has had to just continuously lower interest rates and stimulate more and more and more. So it's obvious to me that what's going to happen in 2022 is, because they're threatening rates, there's going to be a big correction and they're going to come in, save the day with higher stimulus, lower interest rates. And that correction is going to be completely reversed. And we're going to have a massive, epic bull run in stocks. That is the most likely outcome, in my opinion. And if that happens, then growth industries like nuclear power and uranium are going to go through the absolute moon, okay? Especially commodities. Because as some of you saw in my interview with Jesse Felder, it's going to be a sign that the Federal Reserve is trapped. Even though they try to raise interest rates, they're never going to be able to, and they're going to keep them low. And so commodity assets and booming growth industries like nuclear power are going to do insanely well. So that's one outcome. We have a big crash. Uranium investors get even more shaken out. The tourists all leave. Everyone's afraid, but then the Fed steps in and saves the entire market and uranium does well. Another outcome is the market doesn't care about raising rates and just has a massive bull run anyway. And growth industries like uranium and tech and everything just go up together, and crypto and blockchain just goes up together. And we have a massive bull run without a correction. That's an outcome. It's also beneficial for uranium. Hard to believe, because the cheap money addicted economy is addicted to those low rates. And if the Federal Reserve even thinks about raising them, it's going to throw a tantrum, but that's another outcome, but bullish for uranium. Third outcome is we have a stagflationary environment like the 1970s, where inflation just gets out of control, the supply chain issues get worse, and stocks crash, commodities rip, including uranium, gold, oil, anything hard just decides to skyrocket, because those are undervalued in an inflationary environment, and tech and these high valued stocks are not. Again, the Jesse Felder interview kind of walked through that scenario. He's expecting a major commodity bull run. Again, bullish for uranium. So that's 3 bullish scenarios for uranium potentially. If we talk about the bearish ones, you could have a nuclear meltdown, which you never want to bet on. Anyone who's been betting on that for the last few decades has failed miserably, because the odds of a nuclear meltdown happening are like getting hit by lightning almost, if you think about how many successful hours nuclear power has been in operation for the last few decades without a single incident. So it's hard to bet on that. If you're an investor and you bet on favorable odds, then you want to think about the likely outcome, which is that we don't have a nuclear meltdown. But that is a bearish scenario, but low odds. The last bearish scenario would just be an absolute meltdown in stocks, where we have Great Depression 2.0 and everything just crashes to the ground, and and people starve, and it's World War III. That's another option, right? Where everything crashes, including uranium stocks. That is bearish, but again, very unlikely. So if you really look at 2022 and you think, what are the possible outcomes? The bullish uranium thesis is much more likely than the bearish uranium thesis, because nuclear power is a growth industry and it's going to benefit from any sort of booming global economy, especially because we have those supply demand dynamics and we're going to need that fuel supply. So let's look at some news. The first insanely bullish article that came out is this piece out of the Financial Times saying Brussels proposes green label for nuclear and natural gas. European Commission finally paves the way for investments despite concerns over waste and CO2 emissions. This is what we've been waiting for, Europe to finally label uranium as green. Brussels wants to recognize nuclear power in forms of natural gas as green activity as part of a landmark EU classification scheme to help financial markets decide what counts as sustainable investment. In long-awaited plans, the European Commission has paved the way for investment in new nuclear power plants for at least the next 2 decades and natural gas for at least a decade under a green labeling system known as the Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance. This is absolutely groundbreaking because they've paved the way for uranium investment. And you have to look at assets that are taboo and assets that are not. The taboo assets like oil and tobacco, they're very sluggish and slow, but the ones that can be invested in by the BlackRocks, the whales, the trillions of dollars of Wall Street money do much, much better. So with this classification, you're going to get that big pump from the whale and the Wall Street buying. Very, very exciting. On a negative note, you have Germany. Unfortunately, what many consider the laughing stock of Europe in terms of their energy situation is moving forward with their plan. Germany shuts down half of its 6 remaining nuclear plants. So they're pushing ahead and going big onto natural gas imports from Russia. We'll see how that works out. But as we talked about in the last nuclear news episode, their situation's bad. The price of energy is spiking, and all they can do is rely on natural gas, which, by the way, was considered a green transitional energy. So maybe Germany is thinking of natural gas as a transitional energy source, which they're going to heavily rely on until they can get to a more sustainable, renewable energy situation. And that's fine. There is that scenario. But just know, for every power plant that random countries decide to shut down, there's probably 1 or 2 that opens globally. Look at the little old USA, largest economy in the entire world. US officials eye fuel supply for advanced nuclear reactors. As bearish as Germany is, the US is extremely bullish. The development of commercial advanced nuclear reactors intended to help combat global warming and enhance national security will need a better supply of the right type of nuclear fuel, US officials said. The US Department of Energy sent out a request to companies, presumably US companies, that might be interested in participating, to send ideas concerning its plans to establish a program to ensure the availability of high assay, low enriched uranium. So they're scrambling for supply. They're bullish uranium. The United States is massive. The world usually follows its lead and not Germany. So here we go. Not to mention, we have the billionaires, like we've talked about before, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, bullish on uranium. Here's an article. Japan helps build high-tech Bill Gates nuclear power plant. TerraPower, with funding from Bill Gates, plans to build Wyoming's first nuclear power plant. And now he's getting help from a Japanese company. But it just goes to show that for every nuclear power that's shut down, there are many others in rich countries that are going up. So to summarize, all the experts that predicted the 2021 bull run in uranium are predicting a continuation based on supply-demand fundamentals. There's still a lot of wind in the sails of this bull market. The likeliest outcomes in 2022 are bullish uranium. Obviously, there's some bearish. And we have to take all that information in stride. But globally, the situation is still very bullish. And I cannot wait to stay on top of this and keep you guys posted of all the new updates in this very exciting market in 2022. Happy New Year. Thanks so much for supporting this channel. This discussion is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this discussion should be taken as investment advice. Guests are not compensated for their appearance. Do not base any investment decisions on the information presented.